Hey everyone, welcome to an ecosystem session with the New York Textile Labs team, as well as a couple of very familiar faces that we have from the Kizuna team. So welcome Evan, Laura, Akira, and Tats.
Welcome. Good morning.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, we'll do introductions in a
Hello.
second, but I'm just confirming it's the 1st of April, 2021. Yeah, I've got the right date here. Yeah, and so I think we'll do some introductions now. So I'll start with, Evan, briefly introduce yourself.
I'm Evan Schwarz. Laura and I are partners. I'm professionally an acupuncturist, but I stumbled onto Holochain a few years ago, I suppose about 3 years ago. And I just saw what a great fit it would make for Laura's work. And so we sort of embraced Holochain.
Super. And Laura.
So I'm a designer, and also I'm on faculty at Parsons, which is a design school in New York City, where I teach courses around sustainable systems and community-supported textiles. And I run a design and consulting company called New York Textile Lab. Our main purpose is to develop textiles and yarns that are sourced and processed within 300 miles of New York City. And we also build a network of bioregional designers and farms and mills. But our main focus really is to bring designers to the beginning of the value chain in textile production, because often designers don't enter the value chain until much later on, when they're purchasing yarn from a distributor. And that's if in a knit scenario, if they're making knit fabric. Sometimes they enter the value chain even later on, when they're cutting and sewing and buying fabric. So we bring the designers to the beginning of the value chain, which is really important, because as designers, we're problem solvers, and there are all of these moments of intervention in the value chain where we need to solve problems. So entering the value chain way late doesn't make sense. So I connect designers directly to their resources, which are the materials on the farms. Okay. This is my main focus.
Super. I'm looking forward to learning more. And Akira, and then Tats.
Hi, I'm Akira from the Kizuna team. I handle the community management there, and I'm here because we stumbled upon the post of Evan on the Holochain forum. One day they're looking for a developer to help them out in building their custom Holochain application that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm just really excited to be here and thankful to be here, and also excited for what you guys will learn about the New York Textile Labs project. So yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, so my name is Tats, same with Akira from Kizuna team. And I think, as Akira said, we've stumbled upon Evan's post in the forum, had a couple of conversations regarding their operations and how they would actually like to take in Holochain and create something with it. So yeah, I'm also excited for everybody to learn what New York Textile Labs is already doing and what they would like to do with Holochain. So yeah, I personally do developed the Kizuna applications, both on the Holochain side and on the user interface side. So yeah, anyway, I'm just excited to also hear more about New York Textile Lab today. So that's all from me.
And David, thank you for hosting us. We're really excited to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really excited I think I'm the same with Tats. I'm excited to learn and see how it goes. So I think we're going to go with a different flow today the normal on an ecosystem session. So I was describing before, but for the audience, just like to share a little bit. So in general, with ecosystem sessions, we're profiling projects that have been within the Holochain ecosystem for a year or two. Probably people have been to dev camps. Means the community have been like very deeply involved in the community. And I met Evan and Laura, I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we had a call. And as soon as we're on the call, it's like, oh, this is going to be perfect for an ecosystem session, because I think we've also been drawn in. So Evan, you just said you've known Holochain for a few years. So we'll come to that as we hear your story. And then we'll go deeper into Laura's story. And then with Tatsuya and Akira, we're going to go to, because you guys all know Tatsuya and Akira from Kizuna. We've had at least one ecosystem session. We have the AMAs. We've got a demo of Kizuna coming up sometime in April or May, which I'm really excited about. And so we're also going to hear from them on what it's like to draw and start to build and cultivate a project within the Holochain ecosystem. So we'll close off with that. We're not at the stage where the New York Textile Labs guys are building yet. So this is going to be an exploratory conversation around how things unfold at this early stage. So I just wanted to set that context for everybody. I think with that in mind, Evan, do you want to come and tell us a little bit about your...
I think Laura should start, because that's the natural chronology.
Oh, there you go, Laura. Let's tell us a little bit about your journey, and especially your belief system. Like what's important to you in the world, and what's important to you that you want to bring forth and see from yourself, and you want to see in the world. I think that's a really important part. Thanks, Evan. That's a great place to start.
Sure. Evan and I both reside in the Hudson Valley area of New York, which is about 70 miles north of New York City. It's a geographic region that where there are farms, small to mid-scale farms, and industrial towns, or what used to be industrial towns. We've been outsourcing in America since the 1970s, but this is the region where we live. And in 2003, I moved up to the Hudson Valley from New York City, and I was living on a farm, and I had a studio there, and I was developing textile products that I was interested in creating soil to soil production with my textile products, my clothing and textile products, meaning that I wanted to make them so that they could be composted, so that they could go back into the ground and regenerate. And so I started working with natural dyes on the farm, like using plants to create natural dyes, and painting with natural dyes on organic cotton. And my neighbor was farming the land that I was living on, and he was a vegetable producer, and he was carting his vegetables down to New York City every week and selling them there. We have in New York an extensive farmers market system, which is called the Green Market System, in all the boroughs of New York City. So I would go down to teach at Parsons and see him at Union Square at the Green Market, which is like a block away from where I teach. And I started thinking about the resources that travel from the Hudson Valley and Catskill area down to New York City, like our food and water, because I would see him there selling his food, And the lands in the Hudson Valley are the watershed for our rivers and streams and our reservoirs that basically service the 9 million people in New York City. It brings them clean water. So I started to think about how important the stewardship and the health of the soils in New York, in the Catskill and Hudson Valley area where I live, were so important to the people in the city, and not only the people up here, but also the people in the city, and how important that the small condensed area of New York City was economically to the larger state of New York. So I started making these connections. And then I was thinking about traceability, right? Because you can go to the farmer's market and you can see the farmer and they hand you like an apple and you understand where the apple comes from. You maybe see the person who grows the food. And I thought, why can't we have that kind of relationship with our clothing and textiles? Particularly because like the meat producers at the farmer's market were selling added value product, which are like yarns and wool roving. Like it was like they would shear their sheep and sell that in addition to their meat. So I was thinking, why can't we have this kind of relationship? And as designers, why can't we have this direct connection to our resources? So that kind of led me on this journey, to think about bioregional textile development. And I actually started teaching at the Green Market because, it was so close to Parsons. So I received a grant and we built a mobile kitchen and workstation called Textile Lab. And we would wheel it to the market and we would create dyes with the plants at the market. And we would handcraft textiles with some of this yarn. And there's composting at the Green Market. So we were able to illustrate this idea of closed loop production and composting. Do you have a question, David?
My facial expressions, no, it's just, no, I'm writing notes. But I'm now so intrigued. I never realized that this idea sprung from your experience in farmers markets and food production.
Yeah.
Yes.
It really did. It really did.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. Textiles is actually following that same trajectory as food. That's what we're supporting. And so the local food movement and farm to table, we're sort of simulating that with textiles. So farm to sweater, sort of.
So this is really about interdependencies, and thinking about the byproducts of maybe the food that we produce as well. I'm very interested in natural dyeing. That's another part of the work that I do. Although the consultation work and design work that I'm doing now really has to do with making yarns and using the colors of the animals to color the textiles. But I think that there's a lot of possibility, in natural dyeing to bring that back, and properly scale it, for the industry, because scale is something I think a lot about, and growth logic in my work, because, I believe in decentralization and centralization has become a huge problem in our clothing and textile industry. And it's caused, a lot of environmental problems and socioeconomic problems. In 2013, Rana Plaza collapsed in Bangladesh, which really jarred the apparel, the clothing and textile industry into understanding. And for those of you who don't remember that, it was there was a manufacturing hub, a factory where many Western brands were producing their clothing, and the building was in violation of building codes. And anyway, it collapsed and over 1,000 people lost their lives. So it really jarred, the fashion industry into understanding that their behavior was having an ill effect in so many ways. So an awareness has emerged. That's when an awareness really started to emerge. But I had already been at the Green Market with my students, and we were publicly making natural dyes and handcrafting and talking to people, talking to the visitors of the Green Market about their clothing and textiles. Because, a decade ago, or a little over a decade ago, people didn't make that connection that their T-shirts actually started on a farm, So anyway, so that's how it all started. And I developed something called the New York State Regional Yarn Sourcebook, which it has 72 samples from farms in our region. There are knit samples of the yarns that the farms are developing, and it's an industry tool that designers can use. So it's a way to bring designers and farmers together. Because remember, I started talking about moving designers to the beginning of the value chain, directly connecting them to, their resources. So that's a big focus for me. Like, I think it's really, really super important as a designer. If we want to be problem solvers, like, we need to do that. We need to be directly connect. We need complete transparency and understand the provenance of materials. So I developed this book with a researcher at Cornell University, which is located in Ithaca, New York. It's a college there, and we made this book. So it's a beautiful handmade book. I have pictures of it. If you want me to share my screen, I can show you.
Yes, please.
Want to see? Okay, hold on.
Yes, I'd say that the source book is maybe an analog version of maybe the Holochain app.
Yes, it is.
I think of it that way.
So these are some pictures of the source book, and we've been using it so what it contains is, as I mentioned, it contains the hand knit samples. There are 5 copies of the book. There's also an electronic version. I can show you that as well, which is downloadable from my website. But the farmers actually submitted their own writing about their farms. So we asked them to do that. We edited them a little bit, but we wanted it to be in their voices to speak to the designers. So it contains pictures of the farms, information about their the fibers that they're developing, the micrometer count, which is that refers to the diameter of the fiber, which is sort of the itch factor of wool, like the diameter of the fiber, and the lower the diameter of the fiber, the finer it is and the softer it is. So it contains that kind of information, and you just, it's a way to connect these entities together. So that's the hard copy, and then this is the electronic version here. So I have some writing in here and some mapping of where the farms are located. We have over 300 farms.
Oh, you froze, Laura.
Thought it was me for a second. Thanks, Evan.
Maybe I'll go knock on the door. She doesn't know. Your computer froze.
I know.
All right, be patient. She's rebooting. Okay. So I can pick up maybe. So yeah, the notion is that the source book was sort of this analog version. It was an attempt to move the here she comes, maybe. It was an attempt to move the designer, connecting them to the farm directly, right to the resources, so the designer could access the resources directly. And I'm gonna illustrate that. Yes.
Yeah, can I ask? So one of the things I really want to just get clear is, as you illustrate it, what I'm trying to get a sense of, I think what you're pointing to is by moving the designer closer to the farmer, you're starting a movement.
Correct.
Yeah, because that's really this isn't necessarily about a single business or anything. This is really about,
this is an industry change.
Yeah, catalyzing a movement that changes an industry.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, let's.
That's the notion. That's the notion. Maybe I can go ahead while Laura's finding her way back.
Please.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which is over here. All right, so so what happened is, through this development, we found Holochain, and Arthur actually suggested Holo REA and Value Flows Protocol. And as I dug into that, I started to realize that he was absolutely right, and this was the perfect tool for us. So I could talk a little bit about REA. I'm no expert, but from my understanding, REA is just another form of accounting. And it was really developed in the early 80s in the dawn of the computer age, because computers could crunch data very quickly. And so it's another way to organize the data in an industry so we can analyze it differently. So one of the benefits of this textile industry is it's fairly simple. Making a sweater is a lot easier than making an iPhone, as an example, right? There's a lot less parts and components to think about. So over here on the left, we have our REA, components: resources, events, and agents. And this is the data you're fundamentally tracking. So in resources, we really have three things. We have the dirty fiber. That's literally the wool you take off the sheep. And then you clean that fiber. We have clean fiber. And then that fiber is spun into yarn. And then you can do whatever you want with that yarn. You can knit it, you can weave it, you can do a lot of things. Down here, we have our agents. You have your farmer. And what does the farmer do? His event is farming. Simple enough. Designers design. Truckers deliver. Washers do what we call scouring. That's simply the washing of the wool. Spinners spinning it, knitters knitting it. Simple enough. But if I back out and I show you what we're talking about here, let's go to, I have to just move this off the side because it's in my way. Let me move that there. So if we look at this middle supply chain here, I'm just moving things around. There we go. All right, so traditionally, you see we have the designer here all the way on the right, designer number 2. This designer traditionally was way over here. The designer would simply buy yarn. This is the finished yarn, and would send it to the knitting house. So this is where the designer used to sit, right here. What we've done is move the designer all the way to the front of the supply chain. That's what we're talking about. So now the designer has the ability to actually design. It can connect with the farmers, pick the resources it needs for its final product, decide where it's going to scour, where is it going to spin, which spinning mills does it want to use. It's going to have all these resources to actually work with. Now the designer can solve problems. It can look at regionalism and say, I want to use farms that are local to me. I want to use materials that belong in my bioregion, as opposed to the designer usually buying from a distributor all the way at the end of the value chain and having no control, not knowing any of the provenance of the material. So simply by moving the designer to the front, we put the designer, it gave them control, gave them power. So here we have a recipe, part of this REA vocabulary. The recipe is the finished product. Here we have a pair of socks. We can trace these socks back, and we can see the socks were knit at a knitter. The knitter used input yarn. If we follow it backwards, the yarn came from a spinning mill. And now we start to see the resources tracked. We can see the blue and the brown and the pink arrows, and we can follow those back. We follow them through the delivery to the spinning mill, back to the resources. The clean fiber I talked about as one of our resources. The clean, if we're going backwards now in the supply chain, it was scoured or washed. Now in this case, these two resources were washed in one place, and the clean white wool washed in another place. I'm going to blow it up so people can see. There we go. And we track it all the way back. It's delivered. Here it's the dirty resources back to the farm. And of course, the designer choosing all these steps to create their final recipe. So a designer designs a recipe, says, I'd like to make these socks, and these are all the steps I'm going to need to take through this process. While this in itself is decentralizing, because now the designer can make these choices. And whereas in the past, the designer was simply buying yarn and had no idea where it came from. Could have come from anywhere on the planet. So that's really step one. This is a pretty simple chain. But if we scale back here a little bit, we can see designer one over here is making something else. Designer one is making a sweater. in this case. And the sweater's a little bit more complicated. It used 3 yarns as opposed to down here 2 yarns. And a lot more resources, raw resources. Look at all the different kind of wool that went into it and fiber all the way back. But fundamentally the same sort of pattern. What's most interesting though is designer 1 and designer 2 share a lot of things in common. If we look at this top chain, farmer 1, the same dirty white and brown alpaca here, and it follows through the chain. So what's happening is designer 1 and designer 2 are collaborating on a lot of their activity here. So if we can facilitate designer 1 and designer 2 to work together, we've created an interdependence. Now these 2 designers can maybe together they can buy more wool. They can reach minimums that they couldn't reach before. So now these 2 designers can compete with the big yarn distributor that used to exist down here. We've removed the yarn distributor, the intermediary, and put the designers in charge and let the designers collaborate to remove the intermediary. And of course, I got a third one down here where he also shares. In this case, he shares just one little piece, the pink line along the bottom. So by facilitating these connections, and we've actually done this analog. This is what Laura is doing with her work, is collaborating with other designers and saying, okay, if you buy 50 pounds from this farm, I'll buy 50 pounds. We'll buy 100 pounds together. Is this making sense?
Yeah. So you're basically, yes, it's so the marketplace or the collaboration engine, then by starting at the start, can happen at every place.
Exactly.
The value chain.
And
you're able to
that's right.
create different groups and configurations. Okay.
That's exactly right. And designers can jump in and out of collaboration.
Yeah. What got you excited? Because I can see immediately how this then matches exactly the patterns Holochain is able to create. Is that what got you excited? It's the big collaboration.
Exactly.
Stage. Okay.
Exactly. And I saw, Holochain as, I heard words like collaboration engine and decentralizing and coordinating activities. And then, of course, when I discovered REA, it really started to unfold because I could start to see these patterns. So that's really the notion, is facilitating coordination between small players, giving the small farms, the small mills, the smaller designers opportunity by working together to compete with the giant manufacturers in Bangladesh.
Okay, cool. And what do you think? So before we go back to you, Laura, and then I'm conscious I want to get to Tats and Akira in a few minutes.
Yes.
And really, what by working? Thank you so much for sharing this as well.
Sure.
I love this.
Yeah, let me stop that.
By operating, what is possible? So we have this movement. We've seen what's happening with the food movement. Now we're talking about the textile and design movement. So this movement is starting to unfold. Evolving dynamic groups are collaborating in different parts of the value chain. Like what's possible apart from competing with larger players? What else is possible in this dynamic?
So, more stakeholders benefit, when we're using this kind of a system thinking's approach. We were able to work with multiple players, multiple agents, right? We can have multiple man with a van or woman with a truck, to deliver. We can have multiple farms working, contributing perhaps smaller volumes of fiber, because in traditional supply chain scenarios, Evan might have mentioned this, but we have something called efficiencies of scale. And this kind of shifts that idea, because you have to make minimums, right? You need to have minimums in order to have a factory process something. But if we can create these efficiencies of interdependence, this is like a different approach, and it enables a different growth logic. Because, right now the growth logic inherently centralizes, and, the underpinning is, of course, our economic system. I don't think we even started to talk about complementary currencies, because we feel like those.
Yeah, I want to mention that. I'm going to mention
as well,
that. Can I jump in? I'll talk about that, Laura.
Sure.
Let me go back to this map. So when we go back to this map, one of the things we've recognized here as well is this designer has a geographic location. They have a zip code. And this farmer has a location, and this washer has a location. When the designer has the ability now to make these choices and these decisions, they can choose localism, and we can reward that localism. That's where our complementary currencies come in. So if this designer chooses a farm that's 50 miles away as opposed to 500 miles away, maybe the designer is rewarded 3 points. I'm being, X number of localism points. But remember, as we move through this supply chain, we're collecting sort of localism points. Those localism points, that localism score, is imbued into the final product. Assume this sweater has a little QR code that suggests that illuminates the whole provenance. The QR code can point back to this whole chain and tell you now that this sweater has earned 10 localism points. That's deep wealth. That's deep value built right into the product. We can measure localism. We could also measure things like this farmer is practicing carbon drawdown on their farm. They're using we call it climate beneficial farming practices. So crop rotation and no-till and all different things that will help draw carbon back into the soil. So we can reward this farmer for those practices. And remember, the designer is choosing the farmer.
Yeah.
So those values,
sense.
those values will now be imbued into the final product. So this sweater can have a localism score. It could have a carbon drawdown score. It could have a compostability score. Maybe the spinner here is using renewable energy. Maybe they're running on solar power. Or we can measure ethical practices. Yeah. How is the spinner paying their employees? Are they paying them minimum wage, a fair living wage? We can measure the ethical business practices. Maybe calculate that into the final product.
Yeah.
So we want to simply by having access to all the data, and that's all a result of putting the designer in the front. Because when we put the designer in the front, now we have access to all the data.
Right, and I think that the Holochain platform is so. I mean, this idea of systems integrity is so great. Reputational currency to, is someone delivering on time? Are they finishing, their processing on time? I mean, all of these can be given value. These are value flows. So yeah, we're really excited about Holochain, using that for this purpose. But I also want to stress diversity as well, because I think that this system also helps to encourage diversity, like just in terms of economic diversity, as I mentioned, with many stakeholders benefit, like multiple mills can work together, multiple designers can collaborate, the delivery services, like all of it, every single piece of that value chain can be economically more diverse, but then also my material diversity as well. Because going back to this idea of economy of scale with, our typical traditional supply chains, usually, you can only process one color of fiber, one type of fiber into one type of yarn, to make minimums. But with this kind of scenario, it can enable us to use different colored fiber and have that processed. So as a designer, you could be processing like brown, gray, and white fiber, like all for the same, all at the same time, rather than just one color. I mean, it really helps, diversify things.
Okay, super. All right, this is fantastic. So I can see how this is really going to evolve. So then maybe we jump into Tats and Akira for like, so Laura and Evan came to you to tell us a little bit about that story and how you're thinking about, basically how you're introducing the guys to Holochain and how you're thinking about developing this.
I could start, I think. So the first time we talked to Evan and Laura, so just like how they did today, they kind of introduced us to the whole ecosystem of farmers and truckers and the actual designers and whatnot. And so it was very interesting, and it was actually really fun to sort of like map what they're already doing to what is much more possible if they integrate Holochain with it. And so the way they are doing it is already so akin to how Holochain sees like the philosophy of Holochain. And so it was really easy to kind of map what they're doing into that frame of thinking. So there's that. And so the first thought I had also was, okay, have you guys checked out Holo REA? Because I feel like what they are doing is really like a really good example of an implementation of Holo REA. And so these kind of conversations just continued, and we were like, our first objective when we had a conversation with Laura and Evan was, what is the best help that they can get so that they could actually do what they want to do. And so it could necessarily mean that it's not us, and it may be someone else who could provide them with a better support, with the experience that they have. And so we told them, okay, so we could support you getting connected with other people in the community, and just like how the community helped Kizuna so far, we would also like to pay it forward and sort of help the other projects materialize their ideas. And so that's how the conversation has started. And the rest is history, I guess. Had the next call and the next call and the next call with you, David, and now we have this ecosystem session. So so far it's been
exactly.
And then
It's perfectly said.
Oh, sorry, go, Akira.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, that's perfectly said, Tats. And also, to me, my personal experience with the New York Textile Lab is that when we first met them, we felt the energy, like there's some passion here that we can feel. And so that kind of pushed me and said to myself, okay, we should probably introduce them to David. And so I reached out to David, and we got him to hear about the project. And it's like Pat said, this has always been, it's like we feel good helping them because we received the same type of help before when we were just starting with Kizuna. And I think that's one of the nicest things about working inside the Holochain ecosystem, is that you can really feel the values of
Absolutely.
the Holochain application, actually manifest in the people inside. So it's been really fun, and excited for Evan and Laura, and I'm just looking forward to how this story would develop further down the line. So
And guys, how do you go like from what we saw? Because this is again, like what Evan and Laura are talking about is really creating a movement, and so a movement has so many more parts than simply building one application, let alone honing the features of an application, etc. And looking at all the different possibilities and the sort of so much organic, so much can come from individual actions aggregating and really changing an industry. How do you take all of this and get started? Like, just how do you get it started, like focusing on one thing or architecting one thing? Like what's your process, guys?
Wait, us, right? Were you asking us?
Yeah, Tats and Akira.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think we've been the prime example we have, I guess, is Kizuna, and how we do it is we usually apply sort of like an agile kind of mindset into developing these things, and so we always start from the perspective of the person who is actually using the application, who could very well be the agent of all the activities that all the agents may be devices and whatnot, like that person is responsible for it. And so we usually so in Kizuna there's not much, like, different people pretty much have the same capabilities except for some cases, like for example, when you're creating a group conversation, then you may have more privileges than other people who just joined your group. And so one of the things that we did was, what we kind of learned in Holochain is that you have to sort of shift your mindset into architecting these kind of applications, depending on, so your concern is more about the context of the application and trying to find the right way to implement a certain requirement that a certain person in a certain context would have. And so in Kizuna, that might be different, and for York Textile Labs, obviously it would be different. And so yeah, we started with that as well, and we got help from other people as well, especially Guillem from ICE. He has been a tremendous help for us in architecting these patterns in Holochain. And so now what we're talking about, if we apply this to New York Textile Lab, it's a little, it's more interesting actually, because there's more people with different roles and capabilities existing in the same network.
Exactly.
Wherein they can actually interact with one another, right? And there are set expectations that must be met before they can transact and sort of have this exchange of values, whether it be labor or actual resources and whatnot. So yeah, I think I told this to Laura and Evan in the first few meetings we had, that was like, you have to be able to define what each of those agents would like to do in this ecosystem, right? What are their capabilities? Like, what are their objectives? And based on this objectives, basically build like a user story. Like, as this person, I would like to do this with this kind of person in the same network. So
exactly.
Yeah. I guess that's how we usually start designing these kind of applications, and that's why it's really, really like, like the bar of creating this kind of architecture for Evan, Laura's case is really like lower than other applications, because they're already doing it. They already have a framework of, like the flow of value in their ecosystem, and so it's all about taking note of the right information and keeping it, and having it be able to having means to be able to share it with others, with the confidence that this data was not tampered by others, or like
exactly,
it is actually from the provenance is actually authentic, right? And who actually produced this kind of information. So yeah, I think that's from my end.
That's great.
Yeah, no, I think the user story is exactly the place to start. The perspective of the designer. How is the designer to use the app? How is the mill to use the app? How does it, what's their interface? And I absolutely think that's the right place to start.
Yeah, I mean, this app will, the intention is that it will coordinate, commitments from different agents. Like, I'm a designer and I'm looking for, gray alpaca, and it will kind of put that ask out there to the network, and then it will match me with various farms, that have high quality alpaca that is, in that color group. Because right now, like, I'm doing that, like, on the telephone and by emailing, I'm connecting with my book, so to have it happen through an application would be amazing.
It's really interesting. So Evan and Laura, like, how have you found from working, like, even so far with Tatsuya and Akira, just in the things they need to make explicit, how have you found either your thinking or behavior has had to change?
Well, we started doing these systems maps, which have been like great. I mean, that's when things really started, I think, to unfold for us, because we had to communicate what I'm physically doing already, what like, Evan and I are like literally like carting around fiber and calling people, I mean, we're doing all of this, physically, and to show that to them, through a systems map. So like that common language was really great. We started by just hand drawing it. Like, we put a big piece of paper like on our wall, and we sort of hand drew it, and then we showed it to them, and they were like, okay, we get it. And then we went on and we did an electronic version of that.
Right. I think the process itself has illuminated things for us.
Yep.
Like this notion of moving the designer to the front, I don't think we really actually identified that ourselves until we started to draw it. When we drew it out, we said, gee, that's what we've essentially done. We didn't even recognize it ourselves until you start the process. And then it revealed itself. And we said, gee, what we've essentially done is moved the designer. We didn't even know it.
So in being forced, so whether that's working with Tatsuya and Akira or looking at the like REA accounting or Holo REA,
yes, exactly.
Forced to understand, make explicit the collaboration and the networks of collaboration and the activities within those networks, you start to then be able to describe the system change and then share like the simple simple like chain transition or state transition that makes all of the difference. So it's actually what the clarity with what you're describing is to me is partly coming, having done the work of making explicit what you can't quite see if you two people, as you said, lugging textiles around and going talking to farmers, etc. You have to look above, see how it works. Okay, amazing.
Exactly. That's exactly what that's how it unfolded.
That seems really valuable.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And this notion, I mean, and that's what Laura and I have been talking about. What we essentially did was move the designer to the front. That's all we did, and everything else unfolded. But we didn't recognize that ourselves. Laura just said, "Hey, I know the farmer." If I know the farmer, I know the farmer.
You
moved to the front.
Right.
That's right. Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
Just like you selling food.
There's this emergent desire in the industry at large to connect directly with the farms.
Right.
And this is most of this is around climate beneficial textile development now, because this idea of regenerative farming is becoming, I think designers are starting to understand how important it is that we're tending to the soil, like, and we meaning collectively, culturally, that we're sequestering carbon back into the ground.
Environmentalism is obviously
interesting.
it's a value here.
I'm wondering, okay, So maybe I'm making too much of this link, but Laura, like again, what I'm hearing is as the farmer comes direct from the farm to the consumer at a farmer's market, and then the consumer comes to see them the next week and the next week,
Right.
they develop a different form of accountability with their product and their production. And actually what you're saying is by putting the designer at the front and the designer interacting directly with the farmer, then what you're starting to see is some of these practices and behaviors, they become way more accountable to the creator, and therefore there's more incentive. So it's not environmentalism for the sake of environmentalism. It's a movement towards increased quality, increased care, etc., because the change in relationship. Okay,
You
that makes
got it.
so much sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Guys, this is so powerful. We're close to time. Is there anything any of you guys want to share to conclude today?
No, I think your conclusion was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
And I want to also say that that I'm also an affiliate of a larger non-for-profit affiliation called Fibershed that works to build regenerative textile systems. So so this is something that is I'm not the only person building, you know, these bioregional systems. This is happening all over the world now. It's an international organization, Fibershed.
Absolutely, because it's a movement, and you guys are building technology to support the evolution of a movement.
To support the movement.
Exactly. Oh, this is wonderful. Well, I'm not sure what the rate of progress is or anything, but I'd love to chat to you all again in probably a couple of months to get an update, maybe of what's being built, how things are evolving, what you're discovering, what you're learning. Does that seem like a good time frame?
That. Yeah, we would love that. Thank you.
Yeah, you would love
Superb.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you,
thank you, David.
Akira.
Thank you, Evan and Laura.
Thank you guys. Too. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you
Welcome.
soon.
Happy to help.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, David.
Bye,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.